All right, so we're starting on the front page. So we're going back to the front page. All right, we had talked about an epidemic and a pandemic. So we're going to talk about pathways of infectious disease. All right, so where can infectious disease come from? Where can it spread? How does it spread? So the first thing, we're just going to list these underneath where it says pandemic, where it says pathways of infection. We're going to list some of these. So the first thing, pets. What kind of diseases do pets have that they could transmit? Yeah, fleas, okay, or maybe ticks. Okay, livestock is the next one. All right, livestock, you might have heard of like chronic wasting disease or mad cow disease. Wild animals. Anyone know of any diseases wild animals could spread? Rabies, good. Mosquitoes, so malaria, Zika, West Nile. Food, what kind of things might be in food? Salmonella or E. coli. Water, okay, this is why typically in developing countries we see a lot more individuals that have transmissible, end up dying from transmissible diseases or infectious diseases. And then air. Okay, so these are different pathways that we get to infection, different vectors. You might hear the word vector or host, things that can hold these disease-causing organisms, these pathogens. Okay, so we're going to go over some of these pathogens or disease-causing organisms. I do not need you to remember every single detail of these. I need you just to have a general idea of what it is. So like malaria, you're like, oh, mosquitoes. Great. Okay. Something along those lines. The chances that they would ask you about a specific type of disease is pretty slim on the AP exam. I will have a test question on Friday on West Nile because we did a demo on it. But other than that, I probably won't include a ton on the different types, but I need you to know some background on some different types of infectious diseases. So the plague, okay, is caused by a bacteria, and that bacteria is caused by fleas, and the fleas attach themselves to rodents, things like mice. So you might have heard of the bubonic plague or the Black Death, and these happened in medieval times. Okay, 1300, 1600, and we get a lot of individuals that ended up dying from the plague. They didn't have antibiotics, okay, at this point in our history, so they didn't really have a lot of options to treat it. So again, we're talking about it's not the fleas or the mice that actually cause it. It's the bacteria that lives inside of the fleas or inside of the mouse. All right, malaria. Fun fact. When I was in Africa, one of my friends got malaria, one of them who was on a trip with me. So what is malaria? Well, it's basically a protist, or plasmodium is the name of the protist. So a protist is an organism. It's like a small organism like a bacteria. It spends one part of its life in a mosquito and another part in a human. So kind of just like what you guys saw with West Nile, it can live in different types of organisms. So in order to prevent malaria, we would want to prevent mosquitoes. So what kinds of things could we do to prevent mosquitoes? Okay, pesticides, right? But if we talk about integrated pest management, right, pesticides probably aren't going to be the smartest option for the environment. So what other things could we do? Anyone know how people in a lot of malaria-ridden countries sleep? Mosquito nets, right? Sleep with a mosquito net over them. I've slept with a mosquito net over me a lot of times to prevent mosquitoes from biting you while you're sleeping, okay? There's anti-malarial medication if you like go on a trip somewhere to a malaria or a country that has malaria. You could try to get rid of like standing water, right, so that the mosquitoes don't have breeding grounds. But basically it affects your like energy levels and your fatigue. So you're pretty tired all the time, kind of weakens your immune system a little bit. Tuberculosis, TB, this is a nasty one. I know we were talking about it the other day. And this affects your lungs. So it's a bacteria, affects your lungs, and it basically kind of eats your lungs. It causes your lungs to deteriorate. So it causes a lot of coughing, and that's how it's spread typically. And so if you look at these two pictures of the lungs, right, you can see this lung is not doing too hot, right? And so one of the main symptoms is actually they cough up blood because their lungs are being destroyed from the inside out. So one of the things that we're concerned about now is, okay, if we develop medicines or antibiotics to treat these, well, what happens if and when they become resistant? Okay, so antibiotic resistance, as we use antibiotics to treat bacterial diseases, the resistant strains become more toxic or more common. And I'm going to show you exactly how this happens in a second. So how does this resistance occur? I'm going to show you a little like game demo thing. So normally we get all these bacteria. Anyone know how bacteria reproduce? Well, bacteria reproduce just by literally like splitting in half, okay? So they divide in half. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you this. So bacteria split in half, they copy their DNA, and they just divide in two. So you see these bacteria splitting into two. And now what ultimately ends up happening is that bacteria suck at copying their DNA, okay? So they're not very good at copying their DNA, and a lot of times they make mistakes, mutations. When they make a mistake, well, that bacteria is a little bit different than the bacteria it came from. So as these bacteria divide, you'll notice some of them have mutations. They look a little bit different. This happens all the time because bacteria are really bad at dividing and copying their DNA. So eventually we get lots of different types of bacteria or, versions, okay? Kind of the same idea with the flu virus. Why do we get lots of different flu viruses or a different flu virus every year? Well, because it mutates, and when it copies itself, it's not very good at copying itself. So we can use antibiotics, right? So here are my bacteria. They're copying themselves. Well, we might get a couple mutations. That's normal. But let's give them an antibiotic. Oh, we'll just wipe some of them out. Okay, well, that's great. But eventually what happens here is we're going to get to a point where these antibiotics don't really work. Okay, and some of them have mutations that allow them to be resistant to antibiotics. Okay, and that's kind of what you're seeing over here. So, let's just give them some more antibiotics. Okay, well, they're starting to multiply some more mutations. Oh, let's give them another antibiotic. And what ends up happening is over time, the resistant bacteria end up multiplying and multiplying, okay? And we're going to end up with a lot more resistant bacteria because they can end up surviving better. So this is how antibiotic resistance works. And you see that down below here. You've got bacteria, a couple of them are resistant. Okay, the orange ones, we give antibiotics. The orange ones end up surviving, right? And then they reproduce. And now all of a sudden we've got a bacterial resistant strain in our body. Okay. All right, emerging infectious diseases. So these are diseases, okay, that are becoming more problematic. Okay, so they're either new diseases, they're re-emerging because they kind of went away for a while, but now they're coming back again, or they're drug resistant now because they've mutated. And they're increasing in humans within the past couple of decades. So what are some of these diseases that are becoming more and more common? Well, HIV and AIDS, okay, Ebola, mad cow disease, bird flu, SARS, we'll talk about West Nile, all of these things that you might hear about on the news, okay? You could even argue that like the flu at certain times is an emerging infectious disease because it mutates so often, and every year we have a flu season, okay? All right, AIDS. A lot of people don't understand the difference between AIDS and HIV. So AIDS is autoimmune deficiency syndrome, okay? It's caused by a virus. So basically what happens is this virus infects your body, and if this virus stays in your body long enough, it ends up giving you AIDS. So how does it spread? You guys know this, sexual contact, blood transfusion. Originally, though, fun fact, it was passed from chimps to humans through bush meat, meaning humans that lived in the jungle killed some of these chimps and ate their meat. And those chimps were infected. And so that's how it got transferred to humans. There's no cure. You can manage it, but there's no cure. Well, what does it do to your body? Well, notice we see the words immune, right? Immunodeficiency. So it affects your immune system. And what we see here is your immune system gets really weak. Your body can't fight illnesses. And as a result, you get more illnesses. Okay, those illnesses like tuberculosis, malaria, cause you to be underweight or malnourished, right? Which if you're underweight or malnourished, that's going to have your immune system weaken even further. So it's this cycle, right? We talk about positive feedback loop, snowball effect. And typically people don't die from AIDS or HIV. They die because HIV or AIDS has taken over their immune system, and when they get a sickness, they can't fight it off, okay? So it's the sickness that ends up killing them. So if we look at infections, you guys know this, the majority that we're seeing are in Africa, okay? But that doesn't mean that there isn't AIDS or HIV here. All right, Ebola, you have probably heard of this, right? Somebody said that Ebola, they remembered hearing about it when they were in middle school. Okay, this is where Ebola risk is the highest, okay? It's in a small chunk of Africa. and it's a super high death rate, causes fever, vomiting, and basically you bleed from the inside out. Now, anytime we're talking about infectious diseases, super important to remember they're still contagious. It doesn't matter if the person's dead or not. So when they have to bury individuals, they have to wear all of this protective gear because you don't want to get Ebola even though the person is dead. So Ebola, okay, mad cow disease. So this is basically a cow goes kind of crazy or mad, or appears to go crazy or mad, because these small proteins damage the cow's nervous system. And the cow no longer can coordinate its body. And so humans were worried about this about 10 years ago because mad cow disease was on the rise. And people thought, oh my gosh, what if I eat infected meat? Okay? What if I eat meat that's infected and, you know, my hamburger gives me mad cow disease? Okay? So this was a big deal back then. You might have also heard of chronic wasting disease with deer. People were worried if they shot a deer, you know, were they going to be able to eat the meat, right? Can they make it into venison? Because does that deer have chronic wasting disease? So these are all different kinds of examples of infectious diseases, okay? So I want you to be kind of aware of them, have a general idea of what it is, like, oh, mad cow disease, okay, it makes the cow go mad, great. It's an infectious disease. Now, swine flu. Swine refers to what? Pig. Avian refers to what? Bird, right? So swine flu and bird flu. Okay. Again, they're caused by viruses. Do you need to ever know the name of a virus? No. Okay. It infects pigs. It's transferred to humans. Again, do not memorize all of these different types of things. Okay. I do not want you to spend your time memorizing all of the symptoms and what each thing is caused by, okay? Know that they're infectious diseases. Be able to use them to figure stuff out if you need to. So this swine flu can be transferred to humans, okay? Same thing with the avian bird flu. This was in 2010, okay? This was when I was in high school and people were like freaking out and thought we would like have to cancel school because so many people were contracting H1N1, right? In the US, we had 33,000 cases, okay? So the deaths increased significantly over that period of time. It ended up not becoming a huge deal, but for the time being it was. Okay, so swine flu, avian bird flu. Here is where we saw a lot of those the avian flu, the bird flu, okay, from 2000 to 2013. So it was a lot of these Asian countries. All right, here's what we looked at today. West Nile virus lives in birds, transmitted by mosquitoes. Okay, it can now infect humans, right? Humans don't typically die from it, but it causes inflammation of the brain, and it causes death. Okay, so we saw that it can infect horses, it can infect birds, lots of different bird species. So one of the things they recommend to fight mosquitoes here, like get rid of containers outside that hold water, repel mosquitoes, use insect repellent, and report if there's water sitting around, all those different things. Okay. Okay. So West Nile, how common is it in Wisconsin? Well, 2016, we had 13 cases. Look at 2012, we had 57 cases. So it's not something that we've never heard of here in Wisconsin. It's just not super, super common. Okay. All right. This is the last thing we're writing down. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. I honestly don't hear a ton about this typically, but it's a form of pneumonia. It's caused by a virus. basically. So you would expect issues with lungs and breathing. Okay. So the last thing here, you don't need to write anything down. Zika, though, mosquitoes, what do we know about Zika? Birth defects, right? So similar to those chemicals, teratogens that we talked about that cause birth defects.